Hey everybody, welcome to B2B Marketer's Guide to AI Search, episode one. How the heck did we get here and where in the world should I start? The reason that I actually started this show was because I just wanted to turn myself into an 8-bit character, so I got to do that. No, I'm just kidding. It's great to have you guys here. One of the questions I hear all the time, especially getting to talk to marketers literally all day, every day, is look, I know that there are things I should be doing to start talking about AI search and things that I could be optimizing, and how do I start? How do I audit? How do I know where I should go? What are the metrics I should track? And that's one of the things, hopefully, that we'll kind of take away from today. Really, is setting that baseline and knowing where to start and begin. I think what's important for us, especially as many of us sort of come from different generations and legacies and styles and introductions to the world of marketing, whether you come from the creative side, the revenue side, whether you come from the searching and spec sheets and pamphlets world. This is for you, right? This is a nice little introduction to really understand how we should set the table well and effectively for some of our strategies is whenever it comes to AI search. Now I will note this really is primarily for B2B audiences, right? There are some truths that will apply to both B2C and B2B audiences, but really the idea for this is how can we turn AI search into a meaningful tool in the world of B2B? It's funny. Like one of my very first introductions to like old school sort of B2B research and stuff like that, ironically, came from my mother. Um, I always remember as a kid, like one of my favorite trips was when we went to Disney World, and I think I was 12, and my brother and sister at the time were like 5. But it was so foreign to me because my mom literally would go to like Barnes and Noble in the library and like get books and would send in for pamphlets from like Disney World, and we'd have these like VHS tapes that they would send us, and we literally had to comb through all these pamphlets and books and try and figure out, okay, well, if we stay on the monorail, what does this mean? What are the best times to go? What's the food and wine festival? What are some character meet and greets we could expect? And it's almost baffling to me looking back now, because like all of that information that had to be just like dog-eared and highlighted and sought in these really laborious and intensive ways. It's so crazy to me now that literally, as we're planning our trip to Disney World with my daughter, my wife and I, literally, I don't know that I would pick up a book, to be honest with you, because we can do everything we need to in tools like GPT and in large language models and things like that. Now, sure, there's obviously like YouTube research and stuff like that, but the majority actually of the planning, the organizing, and the research is done for us in ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini, you name it, right? They're all sort of interchangeable. But it's so interesting to see how that juxtaposition has sort of inserted itself into the world of B2B as well, right? Because you've got sort of this old school world where, instead of like books that you would earmark from Barnes and Noble about Disney World, you used to have to mail in to get spec sheets, or you would get all of your information from trade pubs or heck magazines for a lot of local stuff. And that's sort of, as the internet really got its legs, that morphed a little bit more into, SEO. How do we get click-throughs? How do we get organic leads? And that sort of has had its own little separate journey. Now we're at this point where we're having to have conversations about GEO and AEO and optimizing all sorts of different things, because the world that we live in now, especially the 35% of people who make purchasing decisions based on research that they've made in an LLM, they're looking for direct and targeted answers. They're not looking to, have a really high click through rate. They're not necessarily even as influenced by ads in the same way that they might in the traditional like blue link, click search style. So now in large language models, you're seeing this desire for an answer instead of necessarily an action, if that makes sense from a marketing trackability standpoint. It's a little bit more difficult from a quantification point to sort of track and measure, but as you can start really building that authority in those LLMs, they're going to continue to reference you as people ask very specific and targeted questions. As you are solving very specific problems. Where I'm in Dallas right now, right, and it's sort of a wonderful white tundra behind me. I can bet you that people were auditing where they were being searched upon for snow shoveling services in Dallas, Texas. I realize it's probably a little bit more B2C, but it's funny to be able to now see how the world has evolved, right? Some of those, the trade shows, some of those things are still relevant and important to the industry, but the number of people that are researching on these large language models is not going down, right? So it's important for us to have a strategy and to start with an important baseline. And that's really where I kind of want to start for us today is okay, we sort of know, we've had conversations, we've heard or we've thought about, how do we deploy AI? How do we measure it? How do we track it? And you're not alone in that, right? Like 2025 was sort of a banner year for this idea of GEO and search engine optimization, or I mean, sorry, answer engine optimization. And we are at a point now where we've kind of got some answers. The LLMs really have done a good job of saying, hey, this is sort of the appetite we're looking for. Uh, but in the same way that world of SEO was fed off of largely good information and good answers and formatting and tagging and titles and sitemaps and all those things, those are all still very important. But AEO and GEO and AI search engines now want to consume what's called canonical content. What do I mean by that? It means very specific content that is trustworthy, that's got some level of authority. So when I say, canonical content, it might be like if I'm a mount manufacturer in AV, I want to now publish content instead of stuff that's a little bit more generic. I now want to answer very targeted and specific questions. So best mounting solutions for healthcare professionals who drill into metal studs, right? Very targeted, very specific. You don't always have to get that granular necessarily, but the more, especially as you have use cases across verticals uh, and uh, and really industries in a lot of ways, the more specific and granular you can get. Now we'll get into some ways about how you can kind of source some of that knowledge, how you can publish that expertise at scale. Obviously, literally, that's something we see every single day, but it's important really to start with that baseline, right? And when we're thinking about AI in terms of okay, what are some of the questions we want to rank for? What are some of the conversations we want people to have? What even is the sentiment in general of what people are saying? That's where I kind of want to start for us today. Well, I'll walk through. There's just a handful of steps that I recommend for people as they really start that journey. And the first question, is to identify some of the questions that matter for your audiences or your buyers, right? Maybe your buyers are asking specifically about, if I'm a fiber manufacturer, maybe they're asking about different, speeds and throughputs and scalability and natural disasters or resilience, or, if I'm a utility provider, I may be asking about renewables. I may be asking very specific questions about microgrids and communities, right? It's helpful to start with that level of understanding. Hey, what are the key topics that are people are asking for? What are the verticals that people are asking these questions in? And then just literally, I encourage you to write that list out. You can also use it like GPT or whatever to say, hey, what do you see people searching in here for? And that gives you a really nice place to sort of start with. And then at that point, what I would recommend is you pick, a small handful of that, maybe 3 to 10, somewhere in there, and then you use a tool, and I'll show you kind of how I do it. You use a tool to actually help search for those specific prompts and those specific topics. So the tool that I choose to use is actually a feature that we built into MarketScale Studio. It's called AI Insights. It's actually super helpful, especially like in the context of our clients where they're trying to figure out different topics, different conversations. So when I'm trying to figure out, hey, how do I create more content that's specific towards mounting solutions in healthcare, I can actually track some of those and I can track my progress over time, specifically kind of in what we're using today. And it all is sort of a nice ecosystem for my sort of day to day. But when you have those questions sort of input in there, maybe it's that 10, whatever, maybe it's these prompts. And here's even this is a demo instance, by the way. This isn't AMD's real instance, so don't freak out on me. But you can go in and say, hey, these are some of the prompts that I want to track, right? Or these, if in 2026, my mission as a marketer in security is to own the conversation around remote security guarding, or to talk about how AI and facial recognition are saving people money in X specific industry or use case, right? You can actually go in and track those. So input those to a tool, a platform. In this case, I've done this, like I said, inside the AI Insights tool inside MarketScale, and you can go in and see how each of those large language models responds. Now, one thing I do want to make a really clear differentiation on. So this is one of the reasons I kind of love using this is it's it's agnostic on purpose, right? So it's incognito on purpose. So a lot of times when people will use like a Google or use a Gemini or GPT or something like that, it will curate based off of their search history, based off of their presence, preferences, and things like that. This is a really nice, straightforward, right down the middle kind of fastball of a blanket. Hey, what are some of the things coming in cold that people are searching for? So I can jump into that specific prompt here, and I might say, say the prompt is how enterprises select AI compute platforms. I can go in and I'm going to track sort of my brand visibility, my response rate on some of those questions. And this is how I'll establish that baseline, right? So I'll go in and say, Gemini, we're seeing a lot of success and mentions on the Gemini platform or Perplexity or even in Google AI search, right? We're seeing responses where we're popping up in certain places, right? So you can do that a little bit more granularly. What this will do is this will actually help you identify some of those key topics or key questions you might not even be ranking well for, right? So in this case, let's say uh, I'm going to pull something out here, right? So let's say I'm not indexing. I'm not even being mentioned at all in Chat GPT in this prompt, right? So how enterprises select AI compute platforms. I'll go in literally and it'll show me the response here, and I'm not even mentioned one time. So it may be important for me, especially in the context of being an enterprise business. Hey, how can I best answer this question? How can I best create content to answer those questions that AI search engines will index? And whether it's this question, whether it's the other two or three questions that you have, this sort of model that I'll talk about is really really important, impactful, and where that canonical content sort of comes in. So as you're setting that baseline, I do want to kind of call out one thing. It's important for you to track it, right? So, if I say I'm going to start tracking something on January 10th, and then I'm able to actually literally now go see, hey, where am I getting mentioned more? Where have I been seen less? What are some of the places where I'm having success or failure? This is a really nice quantifiable way to help track that, to see that as you're publishing more specific canonical content, you're gaining traction there, right? So my next sort of step is, once you've identified those main three questions or topics that you want to own, is to actually literally, like that day, create content around it. Now that may be like, shameless plug, maybe you want to create with your subject matter experts inside MarketScale and create this wonderful UGC style content, video, blog, maybe you want to do a podcast, whatever, great, do that. The reason why I would recommend doing that, or look, use whatever platform you want, I don't care. But what that's going to do whenever I publish that to my blog, or I publish that to LinkedIn, or I publish that to YouTube or wherever, now I will be seen and cited as an answer to a very, very specific question. So if I'm XYZ search engine or XYZ LLM, and somebody types in what is the best mounting solution in healthcare spaces, well, guess what? I literally have content that answers that question. So if I'm ChatGPT or if I'm an LLM, who am I going to go to? Well, I'm going to go to a trusted resource that's answering that question. I'm going to, present some concerns. I'm going to present some options. But now, especially as you especially as you continue building that content, you will see your authority level build and build and build in that, and that's why tracking it is so important. Obviously, whenever you source that, you create video. Look, maybe you just type it out, put it on a blog. That's like the absolute baseline of what you would do to publish. But whenever you're publishing, it's important to target primarily where your audiences really already are, right? For a lot of people in hyper technical industries, Reddit is a massively underused resource, right? So maybe you've got, a subject matter expert or a sales guy or an engineer, and you see all these Reddit threads and these Reddit comments that say, man, the usability of XYZ product is a little dicey. But then you might have an engineer come in and say, hey, here's actually the why behind it. Because whenever you actually mix this with a mixed current, that won't ground the line or something like that, right? So now you're answering very targeted specific questions on places where they are. So whether that's Reddit, whether that's LinkedIn, obviously the number one B2B social media platform for reaching executives, reaching folks within the community, or maybe platforms like YouTube. YouTube is a great educational resource and tool for people to publish on as well. But that's also very important to track, right? Because as I'm publishing on these places, that's where these LLMs are pulling from, right? Obviously, in your website as well. So it's important to make sure that that content is published and answering those questions where people are asking or people are responding. because that's where LLMs will start to bump you on that level of authority. So that's sort of a quick overview of how I might set the baseline, right, for like 3 prompts to 10 prompts or whatever, and then sort of it scales from there, right? We can dig into specifics about all that kind of good stuff. And hey, I want to rank in this vertical for this and this and this, and I want to have 25, conversations about how this scales out into live events and entertainment industry, right? Those are things that will build over time. That's why it's important to sort of start small with those 3 to 5 specific questions, so you can answer and publish those, right? And I think that's a good place for us to sort of almost reframe the conversation a little bit. And I'll pull this down real quick, but it's important for us to sort of reframe the conversation, because really the goal of search in general, right? And obviously technology changes over time, answers change over time, but the goal really has always been the same, right? We want to empower our buyers and our communities to make qualified decisions that they will like, that they will trust, that they will, hopefully drive repeat business. So as we're talking about like all this AI and LLM stuff, I know that some of it sounds just really, really heady. And as I kind of do more of these, we'll dig into like specific use cases and how to source experts and what types of conversations are important and what platforms perform a little bit better. It's important to really have our true north be, hey, we want to teach and educate our buyers and our audiences, right? And if that means, hey, we sort of tweak this and we make sure that we're reaching these different audiences with these different content pieces, we need to be doing it, right? And it's the best way, especially as a marketer in 2026, the best way to go to market is to create with your experts, right? Let them teach, engage, and really reach and teach those folks, right? Because we're not all subject matter experts on everything. Like I could probably tell you a lot about, you know, specific roofing, things, because my family's owned a roofing business for years. Or I can tell you a lot about pro AV or fiber or live events or utilities. I can tell you a lot about those industries, but I don't know. Like you would never ask me about chillers in a data center, right? That's a question that you would ask a very specific subject matter expert, that manufacturer, that engineer. And a tool like MarketScale Studio makes that really, really easy for you, which is why it's what I use to help source, especially as I go to trade shows and events and stuff like that. So, what I will say, as we're sort of thinking about this, and the show obviously will be a little bit more. We'll get into some real targeted topical conversations, but I want it to be around that mindset of, look, we're trying to really reach, teach, and engage our buyers to empower them, to impact them, to make good purchasing decisions, right? Whether that's on whatever platform they want to buy from, whether that's selling through your retailer partners, your distributors, whoever, maximizing your exposure and teaching and educating these audiences, especially on LLMs, is super, super important and very much part of that. Now, as you're sort of listening to this, I know that a good chunk of you guys probably are watching this maybe just uh, in after it's been live. But if you've got questions, if you've got ideas for topics or questions that you have, drop them in the chat, shoot me an email, shoot me a text. I know most of you guys probably have my number at this point, but that way I can kind of curate this and create stuff that's a little bit more valuable for you, just in terms of granularity, right? So you'll see me publishing a lot of content, whether it's, this live show once a week, whether it's quick little blurbs on social, just about some of the ways that I'm seeing folks really leverage this strategy and building success with LLM search and AI search, especially maximizing GEO, AEO, things like that. So appreciate you guys tuning in. This was a good first episode here, and looking forward to getting granular with you guys every week. We'll see you soon.